Hello and welcome to the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast. I am your host, Matthew Pejkovic, and this is episode number 591. Available
Wow.
now on DVD, Blu-ray, and digital is The Black Mass, a true crime thriller that takes place over a 24-hour period in Florida during the winter of 1978, in which a notorious serial killer embarks on an unhinged rampage upon a sorority house. A startling intimate portrayal of madness and violence that takes a stand against the glorification of serial killer culture. The Black Mass also marks the feature film directorial debut of Devanny Pinn, who I'm glad to say joins me now on the podcast. Devanny, how are you today?
Hi, I'm doing very, very well. Thank you for the opportunity to come on and discuss the film.
Well, thank you so much for coming on to discuss the film because I watched The Black Mass a few nights ago, and it's a film that is still stuck with me. And there are many reasons why. I think first off, more than anything else, the intimacy of the filmmaking, the way that the camera is positioned, the way that the events in the film is portrayed, is incredibly startling to me because it always feels like I was a wingman to a serial killer, and I'm sure that was kind of like the objective that you were going forward. Where did that kind of approach and idea come from, though, Devanny? Because when it comes to the serial killer involved in the movie, which we're just going to say right now, it's Ted Bundy, but this isn't a Ted Bundy movie. It's about him, but it isn't. It isn't so much about him. So we know that, but when it comes to the portrayal of how you wanted to put that on screen, where did that idea come from of having kind of like us along? I guess you could say along for the ride, even though that might seem joyous, but not really. So not so much.
Wonderfully said. It's exactly right. So for me, where the idea came from is I'm very passionate about criminal psychology. I studied extensively. I like to pull from as many real life opportunities, examples I can in my work in independent horror cinema. And I like to play villains a lot. So that was my initial kind of dive into some of these stories and some of these cases. Ted Bundy's, for me, has always been an interest and a focus because he's heavily portrayed in the media, but I felt like was missing so much of the story. It was the same few events told the same way over and over and over again. And I used to tour a lot. I used to do a lot of horror movie conventions. And when I would be signing, I would see stands with merchandise with his picture on it. I would see it on backpacks. I would see it on coffee mugs. I would even see tattoos of people with his image on there. And I realized he's portrayed kind of like a pop culture icon. And for me, it didn't sit right because I had studied the case and I knew what a monster he was. And what I realized was that society didn't understand the monster that he was because he has been romanticized in our media and our Hollywood portrayals. So, despite consistent coverage of him and his case, it was glorifying him almost as a slasher serial killer
Mm.
like Freddy or like Jason, as opposed to a real life person who did despicable things to innocent people. So I wanted to tackle this case in a way that humanized both him and the people that he has affected, whether they were the ones who he stalked, attacked, or ultimately killed. And for me, I couldn't find anybody who could name a single Bundy victim, despite there being allegedly over 100, and everyone in the world knew his name. That didn't sit right with me. So more recently, there was a lot of coverage of this particular case, the Chi Omega murders, because it was depicted a little bit in the Zac Efron movie about the subject matter, which of course further romanticized his image, whether that was the intent or not, because Zac Efron, is hot. And that was
Mm.
kind of the subject matter of all these movies, how cute he was. And meanwhile, these poor women who were doing a press tour for themselves alongside some of the coverage, mainstream media coverage of this case, where they talked about how they are an afterthought in their own attacks and murders. They are a blip. They are a couple of minute blip in the story of this monster. And so I said, these poor women don't even get to have the spotlight or be the forefront of their own lives and their own story, and they are unwillingly subject matter in pop culture, especially in our country. And despite it being decades later, their names, whether they're willing to be involved or not, are constantly reassociated with this, but as a lesser than interest topic than Bundy himself. So when I wanted to tell this story, I knew immediately after seeing some of those interviews with the women that I wanted to tell this 24-hour period in the attacks so we could focus on these people as people who went through something absolutely extraordinary. I think the bravery of these people is just off the charts, because prior to this case, this is the case that coined the term serial killer. It didn't exist before this. This is how they studied and learned about criminals like Ted Bundy, like all the ones we see today, who commit these kind of crimes. We've learned about it from this case, but nobody knows that. And so not only that, but they did amazing work with victim advocacy and how the police handle cases and interact with victims from it. They got Congress to change legislation. And there's so many incredible things that happened in this 24-hour period that are never mentioned because it doesn't fit the entertainment narrative of the pop culture icon Ted Bundy. And so I just thought the story that was left on the table was so much more fascinating and so much more important to tell. And so I was very, very grateful that Cleopatra, my distributor, was willing to take on such a taboo and unconventional approach to this story. And they kind of just took a deep breath and said, do what you're going to do. And it was a huge risk because I didn't know if people in society were willing and ready to start thinking about crimes from a literally opposite perspective. But it was my hope that if we had to literally step into the shoes and live out this day, and all of it's factual. Everything that you see in this movie is based on witness testimony and based on the crime cases. So everywhere he went, at the times that he went them, the people he interacted with actually happened that day. So if you have to live out that day and look the people in the eyes as he attacks and murders them, or attacks and forever changes them, and their families and their friends and society in general, then maybe when you walk by and see that serial killer t-shirt, maybe it won't have the same cool factor effect. Maybe when you watch something on the news about, a mass shooting or a murder, maybe your immediate thought won't be, who's the killer? Maybe you'll want to know whose lives were changed that day. It's just a deprogramming of how we as a society and we as a people receive information about these kinds of cases, and hopefully start to change the narrative and the conversation surrounding them.
Please support Matt's movie reviews on Patreon. Get access to exclusive content, request movie reviews and top 10 lists, and help support my work. Please click on the Patreon link in the description below. The interesting thing is that after I watched the movie and the effect that it still has on me, is just to speak about today, is that immediately afterwards I felt really kind of, I don't know, not culpable was the word, but I felt like I went through an experience, and that experience kind of leaves I'm a believer that's kind of like consuming movies is kind of like consuming food. Every time you watch something, it kind of like it becomes almost like a part of you. And
Yes.
for me, when I watched that film, I felt appropriately creepy and disgusting, because you're kind of right there in the thick of the water stuff. And I think what was really important that you pulled off, Devanny, in the Black Mass, is that where other portrayals kind of like take almost like a voyeuristic kind of point of view, where looking from the outside in, where kind of like when you're in the thick of it and you see the violence and you hear the victims call out for their mother and you see all this stuff, and the kind of what's left afterwards is just that, yes, what we're dealing with here is not only a monster, but we're talking like 1978. This isn't that long ago. We're not talking about Attila the Hun or all that kind of stuff like from ancient history. This is like modern, our times, and I think that's something that people tend to forget as well, is that this stuff didn't happen that long ago, and it's just a shame that the victims have been reduced to numbers, I think, and the serial killer himself has become kind of like this pop culture phenom, and I think it's just really, really effective way to go about doing so.
Thank you so much. It's not a happy watch. It's meant to stay with you. I've been hearing that a lot, that like, some people are messaging me at like 4 in the morning. They're like, I can't get the themes of this out of my head. And that's what it's intending to do. It's intentionally gift wrap is kind of like a fun slasher movie, right? So you
Hmm.
go in completely disarmed, ready for a little piece of entertainment. And what you go through is something so completely different. But that's literally the intention and the complete purpose of this movie, is that these girls thought that they were going through a regular day, um, had zero comprehension of the evil that was about to interact with them. It didn't exist at that time, until this case. Society didn't know people like this existed. So they were completely unprepared. So I thought, to be an accurate ride for the audience, they needed to go in completely disarmed and unprepared as well for it to be effective in that way.
You were talking before about criminal psychology and how you delved into that and you studied that. There's a really
Yes.
interesting sequence in the movie where Bundy's leering in the window and looking at one of the sorority girls taking a shower, and it transforms into this kind of like his fantasy of what's kind of like going through his head. It's kind of like this mix of sex and violence and bloodlust that kind of all kind of comes together. That portrayal, that kind of thing, is that portrayal, how you depict it on screen, is that something you pick up from your research and your studies? Or is that something you pick up more from your experience in horror filmmaking? Or is it just like a merging of the both kind of like coming together?
That's a fantastic question. So I've been asked about this scene a lot, as you can imagine, but I haven't had it phrased quite so well. So thank you for that. So this scene is literally the turning point in the movie. So we're going along with Bundy on his day, and there's a little weird things here and there, but nothing that really strikes you as so different than any of us would do necessarily. It's not the ultimate like, oh crap, we're in a different perspective here. So this is the turning point for the film, when you realize anybody might peek through the window and be curious about what happens in a sorority house with a bunch of girls, right? Like that's kind of almost an innocent voyeuristic moment. But when you see, and even as a horror fan, like there's endless portrayals of the girl in the shower, right? That's a
Mm.
normal, interesting, um, many people can identify with an interest in that voyeuristic moment. So it was important to me to bring you right up in there and then stark go to the left so you can understand the mindset of the person that we're actually dealing with here. And so it is the only thing in the movie that was not pulled from fact that day. However, the scene is based on testimony of Bundy himself and what he fantasized about. And when he started his career, he was a peeping Tom. So he
Mm.
did extensive testimony to FBI agents about his mindset in his correlation between the sexual element and the violent element. So what you see transpire on screen is what Bundy would fantasize about, in his own words, when he would watch girls through their windows.
The Matt's Movie Reviews podcast is brought to you by TeePublic. TeePublic is the world's largest marketplace for independent creators to sell their work on the highest quality merchandise. With over 1.2 million designs, TeePublic is sure to have something you love. I was mentioning in my introduction how this is your feature film directorial debut, but you've done directing before. You've done short films. You've been part of anthology films as a director, and of course, you as an actress and a writer, you've been in the industry for a very long time. When you come about doing directing, how much of your film school is just being on sets and hanging out with other directors and filmmakers? And if so, what kind of lessons do you take from your experiences as an actor to a film set as a director? I mean, is there anything that you brought from that experience, and was there anything that you came across that was totally new to you as the person behind the lens as opposed to the person in front of it?
Great question. So yes, I directed once before at the beginning of my career. It was like a 48-hour thing for a women's film festival. Um, I don't even really count it. Honestly, this is really my first time before when I really dove in and knew what I was doing and was approaching it. Directing wise, was very meticulous in every detail of this film. I had produced a lot prior. This is my 14th or 15th feature that I produced. I like to build the world as well as participate in it. So I really took to producing and having kind of that like creative control over the overall product. 100% of my education has come from on set. So when I started my career, I was just naturally curious about how film sets work. A lot of actors would go to their trailer or just work on their lines. I would be on set, like literally poking the sound guy and being like, what does that button do? Like
Mm.
if a guy was putting up a light, I'd be like, what light is that? Why are you using that one? So I just constantly was questioning everyone in their position. So over the course of my career, I have stepped into every single job there was on set, because I thought it was so important for me to do my best work in front of the camera. If I knew the lighting guy was putting up this particular light, I knew where it was, where I should cheat my performance to have that best image quality. When the director picked a certain lens, I would know where my frame was and where I could do the performance. So it just overall, and I highly recommended it to anyone else who was really looking to grow in their craft in front of it, to learn as much as you could behind, and vice versa. So when it came time to direct The Black Mass, I think that that experience on set was invaluable because this material was highly sensitive and very physically and emotionally demanding. So I had conversations with most of my cast on this. They all read the script. They were, of course, intrigued, but they were like, how are you going to handle this? And so when I explained to them what I wanted to do, which ultimately ended up on camera, everybody was 1,000,000% on board and felt safe to go into these very extreme emotional and physical scenes, and feel that they would be taken care of, looked out for, and that ultimately the final product would be something that didn't feel exploitive, but it felt more validating for the victims of the case. And I knew how to approach that because I had performed scenes like this myself as an actress. So I know what worked, I know what didn't work. I know when I felt comfortable and safe and could feel okay going into such vulnerable positions because I trusted the person who was looking out for me in it. So it was very important to me to be that for my cast.
When it comes to the technical standpoint of the rampage scene itself, it's a startling sequence of events that show on the screen. Not only just in the brutality of the actions of the characters, but in the way that the camera kind of portrays it. The camera, it's like one of my least favorite things in cinema is shaky cam, because a lot of people don't know how to use it. So when it comes across when I watch a movie and it's utilized correctly, because I find that people who don't know how to use it distract from what's on the screen, where people who know how to use it are actually are inviting people to be part of the experience of what's happening on the screen. And that's what
Yeah.
you've done in this film, Devanny. So when it comes to those scenes in the rampage scenes, how much of it is, do you do storyboard? Do you do choreography? Is there rehearsal? Because I imagine trying to get that right, especially on, I imagine in independent production, you have a limited amount of screen time, limited amount of days on set. That would be in a very meticulous and particular way to go about shooting that stuff.
Again, great. These are great questions. I'd love to be able to talk to you about this. So, for those things, I had been working with and in front of and behind the camera on action movies recently. So I went about this like an action scene. I knew already emotionally. I was so familiar with the case. I was so familiar, like I had it ingrained the events of this day. So I knew the final product that I wanted. I know the emotion that I wanted. I knew how to sell a hit. And so when it came to the technical aspect of it, I shot it like an action scene because I wanted the energy and the intensity that came technically with those elements. The shaky cam element, I know exactly what you're talking about. I have been in and also worked on some movies that did too much of it and that also didn't do enough. And so it's knowing the right moments to like add to a hit, add to a receive, add to an element that you're experiencing instead of just relying on it. And so that's how I approached all of this. It was choreographed like a fight sequence. And I fortunately have incredible actors, many of which that are in the horror genre, so they know how to handle the emotions of scenes like this. And my stunt and technical team, my DP, everybody, we choreographed it like a fight sequence. And I think the merging of those two elements made it so effective. We shot this in 5 days, the whole movie. And so, yes. So everything, that was a lot of prep work and really knowing exactly how I wanted to execute everything. And the team being efficient and quick in setups and the execution. So we got pretty much everything that I wanted to have on there. More days and more budget's always welcome. I think any filmmaker will tell you that.
Yeah.
But I think what we were able to accomplish was, I'm very proud of what we were able to do.
The Matt's Movie Reviews podcast is brought to you by Amazon Prime Video. One of the best on-demand streaming services available, Amazon Prime Video features exclusive Amazon originals as well as popular movies and TV shows. Watch Amazon Prime Video anytime, anywhere. Another thing that really stood out for me is the score in the movie. The moments in the film, it's kind of like this uneasy mix, but like effective mix of kind of like percussion, kind of like distorted noises as well, breathing kind of things kind of put in there as well. And the composer is Fernando Perdomo. So when it comes to working with him with the score and trying to get the right thing, how much of a focus did you want to make sure that you didn't want to go down the traditional kind of like usual dark, ominous score route, and you wanted to make something that just felt a little more, I don't know, kind of like almost kind of visceral. It kind of really sucks you in, kind of like the score in a way that it goes about doing so, especially in that fantasy sequence we talked about before. I think the way that the score utilized in that really does heighten the emotions on screen there.
I love that you noticed that. I had several meetings with Fernando. We have worked together on a past film that I did about a year or two ago called Frost. And I met him through our distributor, Cleopatra, who's also a record company. So he's one of the musicians involved in that. And he's phenomenal, as you can tell. And so I really loved his sensibility. He understands the era, and he knows the correct sounds and instruments, and he can play all of them. And so he knew the authenticity that I wanted to come through of that era and that time period. But he also understands that the music and the sound and the score was also a character. So because we were following behind Bundy for most of this, it was very much a sensory film. So we needed to hear his breathing. We needed to feel his heartbeat. We needed the intensity of that to go up with what he was feeling and thinking. And so all that things that you would normally get out of somebody's facial performance, we used other senses and heavily sound to still get across those emotions so you could feel what was happening in the scenes. And he understood that perfectly. I pulled a bunch of songs from the era that I thought were really appropriate for each of the scenes so we could get a feel for what we wanted. And then he created sound-alikes to a lot of the famous songs from that era, and then designed the emotional and the sensory elements on top of it. So like the bathroom scene the shower scene you're referring to, it's a take on We Will Rock You,
Okay.
but it's done with heartbeat. So it's literally a heartbeat is the percussion for that. So you think it sounds a little bit familiar. So you're already emotionally invested before the scene even starts. You're already there with it. And because it literally intensifies with the rhythm, your body will immediately heighten and sense with it. So we were able to get you to go through an entire emotional roller coaster on that with something that sounds familiar and yet is incredibly visually foreign and tense, and you literally have a whole 360 experience and you didn't even know that you were having it. And so I just really think it speaks to the brilliance of Fernando for that, for just absolutely understanding and nailing exactly what we were trying to do with that.
The movie's out now, DVD, Blu-ray, and digital. Before that, you had festival screenings like in the US and the UK and a bunch of other places as well. So when people approach the film, maybe they have an expectation of what they're going to watch. I don't know, another sorority movie, etc. But afterwards, I'm sure that they're, whatever they thought they were going to watch is like changed. It was changed so much. I know you've
Yes.
done a lot of Q&As and talked to a lot of fans and such. What have been your reactions that you had in the film? Was it how much of it was surprise? How much of it was like how I'm talking about myself, the kind of like the emotional impact towards it? Because I'm just really curious about when you meet face to face with your viewers, how they come about relaying their feelings to you with this movie.
That's again, great question. So there's been a varying degree, but overall what we've experienced is everyone kind of goes in a little excited, and then when I come back out afterwards for the Q&A, everyone's like this.
Mm-hmm.
They're processing. So I tried to attend, or whether it's physical or Zoom, as many screenings as possible to kind of talk you through how you're feeling after the experience. It was super important to do that because people were left impacted and they weren't sure how to feel about it. They weren't sure how to feel good or bad, and so everybody I've been in a lot of movies over the years, but this has been the most rewarding movie to do Q&As for, because people needed to talk it out afterwards, how they were feeling, how they were impacted. And it really helped bring everything home on it. The strongest of horror fans, the most brutal of horror fans, everyone said this thing packed a punch for them, because it's different when it's just gore. It's different when it's just an attack. It's something else when you add the emotional element to it, and when you know this really happened to people. It's something that it just kind of stays with you. And so the feedback we've gotten is people are very anxious to be on the team, so to speak. They are thinking about crime cases differently. They're thinking about fandom and pop culture differently. They're thinking about serial killers and how society receives them, how they themselves receive them differently. And they're ironically, a lot of, especially my older crowds, are remembering this era. They were remembering the impact of needing to lock their doors for the first time, about being afraid to send their kids to school for the first time, about looking around and second guessing their neighbor. So there was such an emotional recall for this. And then also just kind of the mind blowingness of being so familiar with the case and with cases like this, and yet never really seeing the victims or the person who committed them, for that matter, as real people. They were humanized for the first time. So there was just so many thematically intense things happening with the viewers in this room. And I think that's why, despite being kind of a tiny movie, it really has kind of had the legs that it has, and the momentum that it has, because they're understanding what the overall theme was with this, which is there's so much bigger than just this movie and just this day. So it's been incredibly rewarding, for one, and I'm just grateful that people were open to it. I met a couple of people in particular that were very impactful for me. I met several people who were at FSU when this happened. In particular, at my last screening at a horror convention in Florida, I met one of the girls who was in this sorority at the time of the murders.
Wow. That would be
And
crazy. When she
crazy.
lets you know that, what's that for you, like for you, when she says, "Hey, I was there, I was in that sorority at that time." what was her feedback like, just in general in regards to the film? Because I'm sure, as we talked about how Bundy has become this kind of like pop culture phenom, and people tend to forget the humanity behind the numbers of the victims, that
Yes.
she would have had some type of um, uh, really kind of unique perspective on it.
I was very, like, honestly, I don't get nervous very often. I was very nervous for anyone who was, involved in this case to see the movie. I really made it with them in mind for them. And so that was the most vulnerable for me, was to see would they understand what I was trying to do. And so for the woman in particular who was part of the sorority, she pulled me aside and she just wanted to talk with me about it. And so she told me, there was a screening that night that was public that everyone at the convention could go to. And she told me she came there with the intention to see the movie, but that ultimately she couldn't do it. She was going to watch it, but she wanted to watch it in private,
Mm.
not with an audience, because she didn't know, seeing her story finally really played on the screen as the focus, how it would impact her. And she felt that she needed to privately experience that. But we talked for an hour. She told me all about it. She asked about my intention with the story and why it was done and how it was portrayed. Ultimately gave me her blessing and even thanked me um, for doing this, because she said she felt like she could finally have closure in it. So
Yeah.
it's been incredible. I've had people from that era who, experienced attacks themselves, sexual assault themselves, and had never spoken about it until this movie. This movie like released that for them. This thing has done so much more for people than I even intended when I started. That it's just been one of the most unique storytelling experiences, definitely of my career and life. And I'm just really blown away by the response so far.
When it comes to this type of horror filmmaking, I wrote down in my notes, I coined the term humanity horror for a movie
I like
like
that.
this. So,
Yes.
Devanny, when it comes to this type of horror filmmaking, is this something, as a filmmaker, as a director, do you want to continue to pursue as a style of filmmaking going forward? Do you have any other ideas in the pipeline in regards to how you want to follow up on a movie like this, or is it right now just you're just letting this film take its time, let it do its thing?
Well, I didn't know right after I did it, I didn't know if I wanted to direct again. It was just such a huge responsibility. I kind of just needed to kind of simmer in it. But I've decided since then that I do want to continue um, directing. I'm actually doing a complete pull. I'm doing a soap opera as a director next. I just needed something a little more surface level, a little more fun and popcorn to kind of balance out the intensity of this one. So I'm going right into that actually this week. And I have been spending a lot of time thinking about, as a genre piece, what I want to follow this up to. I tend to enjoy, escapism, popcorn horror myself. And I feel like I've been going back and forth on whether I should just do something super commercial afterwards, or that if I have a responsibility now, kind of to stay here and try to educate and make an impact with cinema as well. I think in a perfect world, I would be able to do and balance both, but I'm still working on that right now.
Well, for everyone out there listening, The Black Mass, available now, DVD, Blu-ray, digital. You can find it pretty much everywhere. YouTube, Amazon, all those kind of places you can watch it. I really recommend people watch it. Just know that when you're going to watch it, this is a movie that does have an impact, but it's an impact that is vital. I really do believe that, Devanny, because I think true crime as a kind of like a genre in its own just exploded so much over the last several years, including with podcasts and Netflix documentaries, et cetera, et cetera. And I think people tend to get too much into the sensationalist, gritty parts of it without looking at the human
Entertainment.
parts of it. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you for saying that. That's so important. And if you take away nothing else from this project, that that is the takeaway. Thank you so much for your questions and for your insight, and also adding to this such a unique perspective. This has been a really rewarding interview, and I'm so glad that I did it with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for watching the Matt's Movie Reviews channel. Please subscribe for more reviews, podcast interviews, and exclusive content.